what an absolute honor it is to be with all of you. I know you could be anywhere doing anything right now, but you chose to spend the time with us. So for that, I am truly grateful. I also realize you could have had any number of, famous people or CEOs kick today off, but you went with a teacher and a fellow educator. So for that, I'm truly grateful. Then again, you went with an educator and a teacher, so don't say that I didn't warn you. But again, so very glad that you are here with all of us. And so I think, like I said, that's the most important thing to know about me is I'm an educator, just like everybody here. I've taught all sorts of different levels. I've been in administration as a coach. Most of my career, I've been right here at Mission Middle School, which is located in the city of Escondido, California, in Northeast San Diego. And here's a picture of some of our fabulous students. 85% of our students are Latinx, 10% are white, 5% are Black, 80% are English language learners, most of whom come directly from Mexico. And on paper, we're often listed as being in one of California's fastest growing high poverty neighborhoods, but we started to rebrand that as being in one of California's most culturally rich neighborhoods, because we absolutely are. And so as you heard earlier, I am known around the world now as the Rappin mathematician, but I did not start out that way, nor was it ever something I ever sought out to be. Many years ago, I was a new teacher, just absolutely struggling to survive in my classroom. I couldn't seem to get my students to pay attention or sit still in their seats. I certainly couldn't get them to remember the math rule I had, just taught them 5 minutes ago. But what I realized is our rap song would come out on Monday, and by Tuesday, they seemed to have every single word memorized. And so I thought, okay, I got to play on this strength, right? So one day we were studying adding and subtracting decimals. I wrote a rap song about the decimal point called the Itty Bitty Dot. I went home, I practiced all night, I admit, in front of my mirror. And I thought to myself, I am so going to be the man when I come into school tomorrow. Now, I can already see some of you are chuckling already on screen. That's because you already know how this story turns out, right? Let's just say I was not the man, but that's okay. I got in there early the next day. The students came in, I hit play, I busted out the itty bitty dot. As you've already predicted, it was a complete disaster. My students began laughing at me hysterically, and I'll never forget, I had one student, Josue Hernandez. He was laughing so hard, he actually began shaking and clutching his stomach. He fell out of his chair, hit his head on the carpet. I had to send him to the nurse for an ice pack. And so I thought, okay, I see exactly where my career is going, right? Yesterday, my students wouldn't pay attention to me. Today, they're laughing at me. Tomorrow, I'm going to be looking for a new job. And so I kind of blew it off and went about my day. And then a really interesting thing happened later. I was walking to the teacher's lounge for lunch. I walked by the student lunch tables and they were all singing the Itty Bitty Dot. And the next day, something which had never happened to me actually happened. They came excited to be in my class. I think for the first time ever, my students ran into my class with the same amount of energy that they normally reserve for running out of my class. And they were saying things like, oh, Mr. Kajitani, are you going to rap again? Yesterday was the best day ever in math class. And Josue, who fell out of his chair, he actually asked me if I was going to quit teaching and be on MTV full time. So MTV has not yet called, and you're about to see why. But I will tell you, at the end of this week, my students' test scores on adding and subtracting decimals absolutely shot through the roof. And so I've been math rapping ever since. And so, okay, this is totally embarrassing, but I'm just going to put myself out there, show you a video that my students made of the first song I ever attempted, the Itty Bitty Dot. I promise you my dance moves have gotten much better since filming this video. Okay, I still cannot dance, but it's hard to believe this video has gotten over 250,000 views on YouTube, and along with the other rap and math videos that me and my students have made, have are being used in homes and classrooms all over the world to engage kids in math and make math cool. So, okay, here it is. Be gentle on me. Remember, I'm a teacher who tried to rap, not a rapper who tried to teach. But here it is, the Itty Bitty Dot. As I tell my students, turn that volume up.
Now what in the world is that itty bitty dot? Yo, I just can't remember and it's making me distraught. I saw it in the price of the item I just bought. It's the decimal point. Yeah, now you're getting hot. When you add and subtract them, there must be a rule. So listen to my rhyme and use it as a tool. Just line up the dot and give it all you got. I said line up the dot and give it all you got. And when you take the difference, in other words subtraction, just use the same rule and bring on the action. Just line up the dot and give it all you got. Come on, line up the dot and give it all you got. So turn off the TV, forget the radio station, cause the itty bitty dot is a math sensation. Move it to the right and the number becomes greater, and the itty bitty dot needs no translator. Move it to the left and the number gets smaller. Yes, the itty bitty dot is an academic scholar. So don't forget the rule, which needs no revision, cause the itty bitty dot is on a great big mission. Line up the dot, give it all you got. Line up the dot, give it all you got. And thus this concludes the decimal song. With the Rappin Mathematician, you can't go wrong. Just line up the dot and give it all you got. I said line up the dot and give it all you got. Just line up the dot and give it all you got. Come on, line up the dot and give it all you got. Just line up the dot and give it all you got. I said line up the dot and give it all you got. Just line up the dot and give it all you got. Come on, line up the dot and give it all you got.
Here comes the big spin. There's the big spin right there. All right. Well, hopefully that. thank you. I see some of you clapping. Thank you. You're too kind. Seriously. Okay. So I have 3 personal goals for our time this morning for today. The first goal, of course, is that you get some inspiration out of being here, that you get to lunch today or you get home tonight and you say, gosh, spent the day, spent the morning, spent my time with Alex and the ST math team, and it was totally worth it. I know that, and truly believe that as educators, it is the most important work that is happening across the planet every single day. And so whether this is your first year or your 31st year as an educator, I hope you get some inspiration out of our time together. The second goal, of course, I have is implementation, that you get some real things that you can use immediately the second you go back to work, the second you're back with, with your colleagues, your students, but that you've got some real things that you can do, that you can say immediately, that you can implement. And the third goal, of course, that I have is that nobody sits there thinking to themselves, geez, I wish this guy would hurry up. I really have to pee. So don't worry, okay? We're going to keep it moving. I'm going to keep it grooving. We're going to end on time. I'm going to make sure this is one of those keynotes, not one of those keynotes. And if you're an educator like me, you've been around long enough, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So along with inspiration and implementation, we're going for no constipation this morning, okay? That is my deep, deep commitment to all of you. And of course, if at any point, if you see something up here you want to take a picture of, that you want to screenshot, what's mine is yours, take it, make it your own, adapt it, whatever you want to do. Look, everything I'm going to share with you, I basically adapted from educators just like you. And so take it, make it your own. And of course, we've got the slides also that we are going to give out if you haven't gotten a hold of them already. So if you missed something, not to worry, we got you covered. And please remember also, this is a buffet, not a fixed menu, okay? I'm not here to say everything you've been teaching is wrong and you should be using my 12-step system. I don't have a 12-step system, right? Just like at a buffet. You try to eat everything, you're going to get a stomach ache. You take what works for you. You let a few things pass you by. You try some new twists on some old recipes. But please just make sure that by the time we're done, you've got a plate filled with really cool things that you are excited about. And I'll tell you what I am most excited about is just sharing with you really 4 lessons that I've learned by doing along the way. As educators, as people who work with students, we know that the best way to do something is to just get into it and start doing it sometimes. And so I want to share with you 4 lessons that I've learned by doing along the way. And the first one I think is pretty obvious. It's something that we all know, and it is that relationships rule. Whether you are working primarily with students, with colleagues, whether you're supporting teachers, that's something that I think we've all found. Relationships still rule. Relationships are always going to rule. And we found this out, especially in a big way during the pandemic. And so What even is a relationship, right? We talk about it all the time and their importance. And if I asked everybody to, tell us their definition of a relationship, we would get many, many different answers. But for today and for now, really what a relationship is it's a connection, right? You can have connections that are strengthening, you can have connections that are weakening, and you can have connections that are growing or falling apart. What we know for sure is that strong relationships and strong connections are really built on three things. First, they're built on time together, right? We got to learn by doing because we've got to do the time together. There are no shortcuts on this one. I mean, it can be virtual, but we've got to spend some live time responding, interacting with the people that we are building relationships with. Second, it's the same thing I tell my students when they go in for their first job interview. You got to be interested and you got to be interesting, right? Unfortunately, many of us, like myself, have found ourselves in relationships where maybe we were very interested in the other person. They weren't so interested in us, or maybe it was the other way around, right? Our students, our colleagues are amazingly interesting people, but you know what? We are interesting people as well. So we need to make sure that we're interested in them, and we need to make sure that they know how interesting we are as well. So we got to be interested and be interesting. And third, really strong relationships are built on trust. I found this definition of trust recently that I had to share with you, and it is that trust is confidence with the unknown. Let me say that one more time. Trust is confidence with the unknown. If there is one thing that we've learned, over the past few years, it's that we don't know what's going to happen, right? We don't know what's going to happen next year. We don't know what's going to happen next week. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But when we know that the people that we are working with have our back, when our students know that we've got their back, that's when we've got that confidence in the unknown. And that's when trust is really formed and trust is really, really built. Got to spend time together. Got to be interested and interesting, and got to build that trust. And so, in school, especially for our students, there are really 4 relationships that are playing out every minute of every single day, right? There's the student and our relationship with themselves. There's the student's relationship with other students. Very difficult to learn how to add fractions with unlike denominators when you've just gotten in a fight with your friend on the playground. There is, of course, the student's relationship with the content. All of us are here to talk about math today. We know that's a really challenging relationship. A lot of students walk in before class even starts loving math, some of them not loving math. And so students' relationship with content is a really big one. And then, of course, there's the student's relationship with all of the adults on campus. That's all of us. That's the one I want to focus on for just a few minutes, because that's the one that we know has the greatest effect on student achievement. And it's also the one that we can control the most. And so, like I said, I want to just give you some real practical, implementable ideas. But of course, let's be honest here, there's what you think school is sometimes, right? To us, it looks like this, right? We're Yoda. We're going to guide young Skywalker. Guide you, I will, through school. And then, of course, there's what some students think school is. To them, it looks more like this. Same exact situation, totally different perspective. And that perspective has everything to do with the relationship between you and that student, or you and your colleagues. And so the first thing that we've got to do, whether we're working with colleagues, whether we're working with students, is we got to get their name right. And when I say name right, I mean pronounce their name correctly. Especially, I know a lot of us work with second language learners who might come from a different country. The names are sort of difficult to pronounce sometimes. And bonus, if you can just learn how to say hello in their native language, that's all you need to start building the relationship, right? If you just can say bonjour, or, a lot of my students, like I said, come from Mexico. So just hola. And then, of course, if you ever see the parents, now you know how to say hello to the parents. Of course, you got to be ready for, you see a parent, you're like, hola. And they're, oh, tú hablas español, qué lindo. And you're like, no, I only know how to say hello. But that's okay, right? You're on your way to building that relationship. I found this wonderful article on EdWeek recently titled "Pronouncing Students' Names Correctly Should Be a Big Deal." And in the article, it says, pronunciation matters. Research has found that students' socio-emotional well-being and worldview can be negatively impacted by teachers' failure to pronounce names properly, and can even lead students to shy away from their own culture and families. Believe me, my last name is Kajitani, right? I can't tell you how many teachers and coaches I've had who've gone, Kaja, whatty? I'll never be able to pronounce that. Can I just come up with some cute nickname for you that I'm going to use all year long? At the same time, I can't tell you how empowering it is for an adult on campus to go, Kajitani, what a cool name. I'm going to learn how to pronounce that. And if I ever get it wrong, just tell me. But wow, I mean, it makes all the difference in the world. Building relationships sometimes means we've got to do the most obvious things ever, which are say hello and goodbye. Again, not a big revelation, but probably a really good reminder, right? I call it the #1 classroom management strategy of all time, greeting students at the door. It's backed by research. In classrooms where the teacher greeted the students at the door, there was an increase in student engagement from 45 to 72%. Same is true online, right? You students signing in, or, hey, Valerie, how you doing? We're so glad you're here. You know how it is, right? You sign into that Zoom meeting with your department, and immediately upon signing in, somebody greets you and says, oh, hey, Emily, how you doing? We're so glad you're here. And then you're like, oh, no, now I can't turn my camera off and just chill, right? I get it, right? And then, of course, if we can just continue saying the student's name throughout the lesson, anytime we hear our name, we have no choice but to just immediately, respond, right? So just saying hello is so, so critical. As educators, we're really good at saying hello to people. Sometimes we're not so good at saying goodbye because we're in a rush. We run out of time at the end of the day, right? And so making sure to say goodbye is really critical as well. The other thing I've learned, sometimes when we say hello and goodbye to our students, that's the only time an adult is going to acknowledge them until they get back to school the very next day. We can never underestimate how critical it is to say hello and goodbye. And so I have to show you this. Back when the pandemic first hit and everybody went to remote learning, I knew that a lot of students and their parents were going to be very intimidated to learn math virtually. And so with some colleagues, we started what we called the Wacky Math Hour. And it was a free show for an hour every Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. We did this really cool show, math magic and rapping, and we had all this fun, right? But what I didn't realize is that thousands of students and parents and teachers were going to sign up for the Wacky Math Hour. And so there was no way that I could allow people to unmute themselves. So I had to change my settings so that everybody was muted. But the last 5 seconds of class, I would count to 3, unmute everybody so that they could all say goodbye. Check this out. Hey, there it is, another Wacky Math Hour. Thank you so much for being a part of this community. We are so glad you're here. We rock. On the count of 3, I'm going to unmute everybody for our final goodbye, and we'll see you next week on the Wacky Math Hour. Are you ready to say goodbye? 1, 2, 3.
Bye, 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 bye.
There it is. Now, I don't know if you caught this or not, but there was one word that I used in there. I said, thank you for being a part of this community, right? If you make one word change as a result of hearing me today, stop calling your class a class, start calling it a community. Stop calling your office an office, start calling it a community. Stop calling your department a department, start calling it a math community instead of a math department. A class is something people, they show up, they learn some stuff, they take a test, they get a grade, they're out of there. A community is something that people want to belong to. It's something that people want to contribute to. It's something that people want to keep on coming back to. So again, if you make one word change, stop calling it a class, start calling it a community, and you will be well on your way to building those relationships. I heard there's a lot of talk of equity in education these days. I heard this definition by Lavelle Brown, the superintendent of the Ithaca City School District. And I thought this was such a brilliant definition. He says that equity is reducing the predictability of who succeeds and who fails. I'll say that one more time. Equity is reducing the predictability of who succeeds and who fails. When any of our students has an adult at school who gets to know them, who's looking out for them, who's building that relationship with them, then we reduce the predictability of who succeeds and who fails in ways far greater than any program, any app is ever going to do. Relationships rule. The second lesson I've learned along the way by doing is simply that quiet does not mean silent, right? We've got a lot of students who are very, very quiet, who sit there very quietly. That does not mean that they are sitting there silently. You know, when the pandemic first hit, I saw this op-ed that was written, and it was published in the New York Times. It was written by a 13-year-old titled, "Why I'm Learning More with Distance Learning Than I Do in School." 13-year-old girl wrote this op-ed and got it published. And in it, she says, "I've been doing long distance learning since March 23rd and find that I'm learning more and with greater ease than when I attended regular classes. I can work at my own pace without being interrupted by disruptive students and teachers who seem unable to manage them." And she goes on in the op-ed to talk about how she is that really, really quiet girl who sits there quietly. Nobody calls on her. Nobody talks to her. Nobody demands anything great of her. Clearly, she's not silent, though, right? She's writing op-eds and getting them published in the New York Times. I mean, I'll admit, pre-pandemic, you know what I thought class participation was? I thought it was, I ask a question, you raise your hand, I call on you, you answer the question, and then we just repeat that all class long. Since the pandemic, you know what I've learned? A lot of kids love putting stuff in the chat box. A lot of students, they love creating a video on Flipgrid or on Instagram and then creating a response video. And especially our second language learners, they can re-record it as many times as they want until they get it just right. A lot of our students, they're quiet, but then the second you put them in a breakout group or a virtual breakout group, they absolutely come alive. I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back to the days where there was only one form of class participation, which was I call on you after you raise your hand. There are so many different options now because quiet does not mean silent. One of the other things that I found is absolutely wonderful is just to surround our students with success, right? Look, I teach a lot of migrant students. I don't know what it was like to be a migrant student. I grew up in the suburbs of Irvine, California, right? But I can bring in Dr. Ruben Ramos, especially with Zoom. You can bring guest speakers in virtually. It's super, super easy. But Dr. Ramos comes in. He was a migrant student who became a NASA engineer. It's so cool. He talks to the kids about, you know, all this high level outer space stuff. And then, of course, he opens it up to questions. What's the only thing the students want to know? Are aliens real? That's all they want to know. But according to Dr. Ramos, they absolutely are. But he does some really cool hands-on experiments with the kids. Now, look very closely at the young girl's face. I'm going to zoom in on the young girl's face in this photo. Look at this face. Look at that. In that moment, that young girl, she could be anything she wants. She could do anything that she wants. She knows absolutely no limitations. Surrounding our students with success, showing them people who are like them, who were like them, who grew up in their neighborhood. It doesn't have to be some famous person, doesn't have to be a superstar, doesn't even have to be a NASA engineer. It can be, you know, the local accountant or the contractor who uses math, whatever the case may be, right? We want to surround our students with success as often as possible. That might just mean surrounding them with successful mathematicians by putting posters of them on the wall, but it's really, really critical, especially our students who aren't saying much, who are a little quieter, that they see people who they can and want to be like. Now, I have to admit, I have not always done the greatest job at this. I'm just going to stop my screen share for just a moment and share this story with you. You know, this is a tough story to tell, but several years ago, you know, I guess just a few years ago, not several, but I left school, you know, end of the day, I left school. I'm driving home through the neighborhood by where I teach, and I stop at a red light. And, you know, I'm like the first car in the intersection there in front of the crosswalk, and the light turns green going the other way, and the foot traffic starts crossing in front of my car. And out of the corner of my eye, I notice walking across the street, I notice a very young, very pregnant Latina girl who's crossing. And as she got in front of my car, she happened to look directly through my windshield, and our eyes met for just a split second. And I realized, oh, that's one of my students from last year, now very young, very pregnant. And as educators, we know statistically very low chance that she's going to break the chain of generational poverty that often exists and persists with a lot of these students. And I was, the light turns green for me, I'm driving home. And of course I was so bothered by the situation that this young woman was in. But I have to tell you that what bothered me the most is that for the life of me, I could not remember her name. I mean, she had sat in my class for an entire year, not even a year earlier, and I realized she just sat there quietly. I knew nothing about her. The only thing I remember is where she sat in my class, because I remember the girl behind her was always getting into trouble. I knew that girl's name, Myra Ruiz, right? I knew everything about Myra. But the other girl, we had entered into this sort of silent agreement where if she just sat there quietly, I would not demand anything great out of her. And ever since that moment, I've been so determined to just remember that quiet does not mean silent. Sometimes we remember this when, let me start this again. So sometimes, there we go. Give me a thumbs up if you can see that picture again. Okay, good. So, sometimes we remember this when we just say something funny. As you heard, back in 2009, I got to be the California Teacher of the Year. And so this is a picture of me with President Obama and Michelle Obama. It was President Obama's 99th day in office. It was the first time he'd ever been in the Rose Garden. And so, he gives a speech, and afterwards we're all lined up, and he's coming down the line. He's shaking everybody's hand. Thank you so much for being a teacher. Well, the woman next to me, she's so overcome with emotion that she bursts out crying, right? And we're like, hey, you got to pull it together. Like, the president's coming. This is going to be on C-SPAN. It could be huge. And as Oprah would say, she's doing the ugly cry, right? I can't stop crying. I can't stop. All of a sudden, this hand grabs her shoulder, pulls her back, spins her around. It's Michelle Obama, who leans in, looks at her and says, honey, quit crying. He is not all that. Sometimes we realize that quiet does not mean silent just when we decide to say something funny and we just see somebody who's having a rough day and we just say, hey, how you doing today? Or we just tell them something that might crack them up a little bit. And sometimes we remember that quiet does not mean silent simply by believing in every one of our students. This is my friend Martin Reiser, one of my good friends. He's a teacher here in San Diego, and one of my good friends. Listen to what happens and watch what happens when he decides to remember that quiet does not mean silent simply by believing in every student. Here's Martin.
My third year of teaching, we were getting ready for the 6th grade Olympics. This was a big deal at our school. There are close to 20 classrooms participating, and it's something the kids look forward to all year. I just took the time to meet with each student and ask them which event they wanted to sign up for. Now, I could very easily just put out a clipboard and said, everybody sign up for your events, and that's your event, and it would have taken me a lot less time and a lot less effort. But I met with each student one-on-one and just asked them, what would you like to do? What are you good at? When it came time to meet with Eric, he was a special needs student who was mainstreamed into my class. He was often bullied around campus, very low self-esteem. I asked him, what can you do? And he said, the only thing I could do is throw the Frisbee a little. So I said, Frisbee it is. That's what you're gonna do. And I want you to practice, and I believe you can do it. When it came time for the Olympics, my students were spread out all over the ball fields, and I quickly found Eric and stood by his side, as Mr. Ryan would have done for me, and just encouraged him as he was getting ready to throw. And he went up and he threw the Frisbee, and it sailed just far enough to tie for 8th place. And he earned a half a point for our team. And we celebrated. It was awesome. At the end of the events, the PE teachers assembled everybody in the quad or auditorium area, and they said with almost disbelief, in the history of the school, in the Olympics, they'd never had an event end this close. And the overall classroom winner for all the events was our class, and we won by an astonishing ½ a point. My students ran to the stage, and I was stunned. I really believe that I witnessed a miracle. I mean, there's hundreds of points over the course of the events, and to have us win by ½ a point. We went back to the classroom, and I said, I'd like to announce the MVP, who without their efforts, this wouldn't have been possible. And everybody shifted to our pentathlete, Parker Stinson, who earned a gazillion points for our team. And to everybody's surprise, especially Eric, I announced it was him. And without his perseverance, we wouldn't have won outright. And he came to the front of the room, and everybody gave him a standing ovation. Probably for the first time in his life. And it's just taking that little bit of time to believe in them and to listen. And Eric's mom, a few days later, toward the last day of school, pulled me aside and said, I don't know what you said to my son, but for the past 2 weeks, he's been in the backyard throwing a Frisbee against the fence by himself, over and over and over again, practicing. And it took me 2 minutes to sit down and talk with him and share that I believed in him. That's all it takes, and it makes such a huge difference.
Ooh, go ahead if you need a Kleenex or a sip of water after that one. I'm with you. I'm with you. You know, Ed Catmull, the leader at Pixar, writes in his book Creativity, Inc. that there are many reasons why people are not candid at work. Search for those reasons and address them. And remember, it's not your job to prevent risks, but rather to create an environment where it's safe to take them. Are we creating environments in our classrooms, in our school districts, in our offices, where students and colleagues truly feel safe taking risks? Sometimes taking a risk means speaking up or speaking out against something that is happening that's not right. Sometimes taking a risk is just being willing to give that word problem that you're working on a little bit deeper look and trying to get it right when you know you haven't quite nailed it the last few times. Risks come at so many different packages and at so many different levels. Brene Brown, one of my favorite authors, writes in her wonderful book, Daring Greatly, that, you know, we got to stop asking this old question of what would you do if you knew you could not fail? And let's start asking a new question, which is what is worth doing even if I fail? I know that everybody here today has that thing that they've been quiet but not silent about for far too long. Is it worth doing even if you fail? If it is, you got to go for it. You got to go for it because quiet does not mean silent. The third lesson that I've learned along the way is that the answer to burnout is turnout. I want to switch from talking about students a lot right now and talking to us as colleagues and as educators and what it is that we need, right? Because we need a lot, and we need a lot, especially to keep going, because teaching, being an educator, it's tough out there. And the answer to burnout is turnout. And so what even is burnout, right? The famous psychologist Herbert Freudenberger really identifies 3 components of burnout. See if any of these sound familiar. First, he talks about emotional exhaustion, just when it starts to feel like you've been carrying too much for too long. Freudenberger talks about a decreased sense of accomplishment, when you start to just feel like, nothing you're doing really is making that big of an impact. I'm here to tell you it's making a huge impact. It's just hard to see it sometimes. And third is what Freudenberger calls depersonalization. This is just when we start to lack compassion, we start to lack empathy for the people that we're working with and ourselves and the job that we're doing. Of course, as you know by now, I'm a middle school math teacher, so I got to put everything in terms of that middle school students can understand. So here's my made for middle school definition of burnout. See if this resonates with you. Burnout is when you're tired and you no longer care, right? If you are exhausted, but you still care deeply about the work that you're doing, you probably aren't burned out. You're probably just exhausted. Take some time, refresh, rejuvenate, do what you need to do, and then get back in there. But burnout, again, happens when you're tired and you no longer care. So I was doing some research on burnout for you, and I found this article right here, Teachers Suffering from Burnout. Right above it, check it out, a Google ad, Become a Teacher, 11 months. Ooh, yeah, not sure about that one, Google, right? But here's the thing, especially I know that there are a lot of people who are administrators on our call today. Ken Blanchard, one of my favorite leadership experts, says that you don't have to own everyone else's problems. You can help everyone with their problems and you can help them address them. But here's what you do, according to Blanchard. I love this. He says, here's what you do. When somebody walks into your office or your classroom, wherever, when somebody walks into your office with a problem, what you do is you picture them walking in holding a little baby alligator. They're going to take the baby alligator, they're going to put it down on your desk, they're going to tell you all about their problem, right? It is your job as an administrator, it is your job as a leader to learn by doing and make sure that when they leave, they take the baby alligator with them. Because if they don't, by the end of the day, you're going to end up with a whole office filled with baby alligators that you now have to take home, that you've got to feed, that you've got to attend to, that you've got to bring back and deal with the next day. And those alligators are only going to get bigger and bigger. Remember, you can help as many people as you can, but you don't have to own everyone else's problems. When we do, that leads to pretty harsh burnout. We don't have to own everyone else's problems. Self-care is awesome. Self-care is nice, but self-care should never be one more thing that we have to do, right? I work with teachers in Nevada, and they were telling me that their district sent them all an email that said that self-care is really important, and so they needed to watch a 2-hour online module on self-care, right? And other teachers tell me that, our principal wants to do self-care, but we don't have time to do self-care. Self-care is great, but what we want to do is we want to bridge from self-care to caring for each other, right? That's really where the magic happens. Whether caring for each other looks like this, or it looks like this, or it might just look like you sitting in a room by yourself, but connecting virtually, finding ways to really prompt and promote self-care is really the missing ingredient to our success as educators. Look, when you're not in it by yourself, right? When you don't have to be the only light bulb shining in the room, it actually gives us energy, it reduces burnout, and it uplifts our entire profession. You don't have to, and you shouldn't be the only light bulb lighting up the room. We've got to be able to care for each other. According to his wonderful book, Give and Take, Adam Grant has found that 3 decades of research show that receiving support from colleagues is a robust antidote to burnout. Having a support network of teachers is huge. You know what gets us through the hard times? You know what gets us through the tough times? Go ahead. Take a moment if you need to. Everybody, just go ahead and wait. Look into your microphone and wave. Everybody, just look into your microphone and wave. Go ahead, everybody. I see you. I see you. There it is, right? That's the big secret to avoiding burnout. It's each other. It's surrounding ourselves with the best possible people. When we surround ourselves with good people, we put ourselves directly in the pathway of excellence. We put ourselves directly in the pathway of staying inspired. We put ourselves directly in the pathway to turning out for each other. You want to know what avoids burnout better than anything else? Look no further than the person that you are sitting next to. The answer to burnout is turnout. And the 4th lesson that I've learned along the way, simply by doing, is, hey, as educators, we just got to be real, right? Our colleagues know when we're faking it, and our students know when we're faking it. And I would be willing to bet that all of us have at some point worked with somebody who we knew was just kind of faking it. We've just got to be able to be real. Remember what Ralph Waldo Emerson, the famous writer, once said, which is that which we are all the while teaching. Regardless of your job title, regardless of who you're teaching, what you're teaching, who you are teaching, we are teaching more than anything else. Hopefully, it's not something like these guys.
What is the most inspiring thing I ever said to you?
Don't be an idiot. Changed my life. Whenever I'm about to do something, I think, would an idiot do that? And if they would, I do not do that thing.
Sometimes it really is as simple and as complex as that. I got this email from a student of mine named Leslie. I printed it out for you. I wanted to read it just with regards to being real. So let me just read it for you. I got this last year. She wrote, "Hi, Mr. Kajitani. You probably won't remember me, but I was in your math class, I believe in 7th or 8th grade at Mission Middle School. My name is Leslie Diaz, and I thought I was always bad at math. But when I had you as a teacher, I realized maybe I wasn't that bad at math. Maybe I just lacked confidence. Long story short, I remember you made me stay after school several times to tutor me, and to help improve my grade in class, you mentioned you'd give me a few extra points if I presented to the class some information about a famous Latina mathematician. I did, and I remember it being one of the first times I had ever presented in front of a class. I was so nervous. However, it did make me realize that it wasn't so bad and increased my confidence. I am now a graduate of UC Berkeley undergrad and will be starting law school at UC Berkeley School of Law this fall. I currently live and work in San Francisco, California, in intellectual property patent litigation as a paralegal. I can speak from experience that you making me do all that work made a difference in my life." Now, as wonderful as that email is like, Leslie wasn't saying, "Hey, thanks for all those incredible strategies you used for building relationships." She was simply saying, "Hey, thanks for showing up and doing the work every single day." As educators, as teachers, especially people who operate with teaching math, that's what we do, right? It's just showing up and doing the work every single day. Being real means teaching what is real and connecting the curriculum to the students' real lives. Okay, this is my favorite game to play with students. You got to play it too. It's called the Math Professor. I don't have any fancy outfits or anything. I just say, "Hey, I believe there is nothing that does not have something to do with math. And if the students can think of something that has nothing to do with math that I cannot somehow relate to math, they can win a prize." So, same stuff every year. They bring up ketchup and we talk about calories and cost production and ounces and they're really into soccer. So we talk about distance and angles and keeping score. I will admit once I was almost stumped. A student said, "Mr. Kajitani, I know something that has nothing to do with math." I said, "What?" They said, "Love." I said, "Huh." And I couldn't think of anything. Just as I was about to admit defeat, another student said, "I know what math has to do with love." I said, "What?" They said, "When you're in love, that could be very expensive." And another student said, I know. I said, "What?" They said, "In math, 1 + 1 = 2. But if you're in love and you're not careful, 1 + 1 could equal 3. That's when I had to use 2 words all teachers must at some point use: moving on. Look, being real just means relying on who you are and understanding that, you really are enough. This is a poster. This is a poster that I hang up on my wall. It's just a way of formatting your homework paper for students. Only difference is I call it the Kajitani style, right? The students have to write their name, date, and period at the top right. They have to number each problem, keep their numbers straight, circle the final answer, things like that. But it's just a class management strategy. I walk around. I don't have to go, "Hey, Maricela, how come you didn't circle your final answer?" I just say, "Hey, is that Kajitani style?" "No," and she has to fix it. But what happens is over the course of the school year, Kajitani style becomes something much more than just how you format your homework paper, right? It starts to become a part of the culture of the classroom. So when I walk in with a new haircut, the kids go, "Hey, nice haircut. That's a Kajitani style cut right there." Or once I spilled mustard on my shirt, I tried to wipe it off, but there was still a big stain there. I just owned it. I said, "Check it out. Mustard on the shirt. That's the new Kajitani style." And they didn't really go for that one either. But what happens is over the course of the year, the students start to develop and own their own style. And a loud and rambunctious student like Myra, we just call that Myra style, or a quiet and shy kid like Victor, we celebrate that as Victor style. And all of the weird and awkward things that our students think about themselves, instead, it just starts to become their style. Let's be honest, as adults, there's some weird and awkward things that we think about ourselves. what if instead we could just celebrate that as our own style? So what I encourage you to do is find your own style, right? Insert your last name and find your own style, and then just own it. Just make sure that that style happens. Before I start to wrap things up and say goodbye, please, 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 I never, ever, ever want to be the speaker that you hear from and you never hear from them again. So please get a hold of me anytime through my website on the contact page, alexkajitani.com. As you can tell, I absolutely love speaking. So if you're looking for a speaker for your next professional development day, I cover everything from math to student relationships and engagements. I'd love to come and talk at your conference or whatever you got. So please get a hold of me. Like Deb mentioned earlier, if you're looking for a good book, feel free to check out some of the books on my website. And of course, if you're on social media, I love just posting super, super fun things and keeping educators motivated all year long. And of course, as you heard, I did create Multiplication Nation. It's a totally free, very wildly popular program. It's totally free for anybody, anywhere. I will not rest until every kid gets their times tables mastered. So please feel free to check that out. At multiplicationnation.com. And normally this is where I would say, okay, everybody, have an amazing rest of the school year. But I just got finished saying we got to be real. So instead, allow me to say, I hope that you have an amazingly transformative, eye-opening, and heartfelt kind of year where you're authentic and real, gentle on yourself, and one day look back on this time as a period of huge growth for you, your students, and your family. And you come back next year. And above everything else, thank you, thank you, thank you for all you do for students. It has been such a pleasure to spend some time with you this morning.